As someone who hasn't played Final Fantasy XII, I'm a bit perplexed that Gabranth has received a Neovision form before Vaughn. Granted, Seeker of Freedom Vaughn is relatively young, but, wow, is Gabranth secretly popular? Well, let's get into it. His Trustmaster reward, Errant Hound, is a materia that boosts your unit's HP by 30% and their equipment defense by 50% so long as your unit is dual-wielding. That sounds like an excellent materia, but you have to be aware that shields are a type of armor, not a weapon. It might not be a big deal for, say, Gabranth here, but I'm not too keen on parting with my honor of Grand Shout that easily. His Super Trustmaster reward is his armor. Given the amount of HP and defense it provides, it's easily one of the best heavy armor a pure physical tank would want. Well, onto his active abilities. Gabranth's attack scales off his defense stat, so you won't have to worry about his attack stat here. Gale of the Judge will strengthen Gabranth's damage against break bars when he's carrying a sword. Spinning Blade is a Stardust Ray attack that increases Gabranth's defense by 200% and grants him a provoke buff. Sentence is a Bolting Strike Brave ability that fills up his limit burst a little less than 1/4 its max capacity. Judge's Defense is a Brave ability that lets Gabranth soak up physical attacks. It has a high level of mitigation, and it also makes Gabranth resistant to defense breaks. Hatred inflicts a 65% attack and magic break on your enemies. It may be relatively low, but he's not supposed to be a breaker anyways. Circle of Judgment grants a hefty 75% mitigation buff onto Gabranth, though it'll only last for one turn. Volunteered Information shaves off 10% of his HP, but grants a 45% physical mitigation buff for the rest of your team. Not a bad trade-off. His grandest ability, Clinging to Life, has 3 uses. It gives a small re-raise to Gabranth and a 1-turn 80% physical mitigation buff for the rest of your team. Onto his cooldowns. Guardian Flame boosts your team's fire and dark resistance by 100%. Grounded Fortitude increases your team's defense and spirit by 250% and fills up their limit burst by a decent amount. Unfortunately, the buff doesn't really match the cooldown, but a 250% boost shouldn't be underestimated. Mist Veil lets Gabranth do his job as a physical tank again, though it also grant a 50% general mitigation buff to the rest of your team. Onto his passives. He doesn't have anything noticeable here, though he's not really a damage dealer, so that's kind of expected. He's got a 50% resistance against fire and dark attacks, a good amount of provoke built in, and the ever-useful Guts buff. With his Trustmaster reward or Super Trustmaster reward equipped, he'll gain the ability to triple cast in this form, though only for one turn and never again until he dies. He has this counter ability that can raise his physical mitigation by 40%, which is notably lower than his other abilities. Well, it's useful if you haven't casted a physical mitigation buff for whatever reason. If you'd like to build him, just give him a helm, some tanky armor, you know, the things you throw on a physical tank. If you want to boost his equipment defense, you could give him 2 weapons instead of a shield, though I can't imagine you'd want to build him that way for specific trials. Onto his limit burst. Innocence is an attack that also grants your team a 50% general mitigation buff. Pretty standard for a tank, though most players might see it as an improvement over Awakened Warrior of Light. Let's move on to his Brave Shift. He can switch back and forth rather freely. It'd be a disaster if a Neovision tank was hampered because of their Brave Shift. He still retains his defense scaling, though he gains some dark attacks in this form. He can also triple cast freely now, though he loses most of his tanking capabilities. Well, active abilities. Earth-Splitting Darkness really makes me wonder if the characters shout out the name of their attacks. Well, it's a Stardust Ray attack that inflicts blind, and lets Gabranth deal dark damage. Enrage is a Stardust Ray Brave ability that doesn't really do anything else. Mist Blade is a Stardust Ray ability with 3 uses that decreases the enemy's dark resistance by 120%. He switched out 2 cooldown abilities. Guardian's Tenacity is a Stardust Ray attack that increases the damage modifier of his other attacks. Loyal Shield turns Gabranth into a human shield for another ally, and grants a 200% defense and spirit buff for the rest of your team. As you might expect, his passives have changed. He'll now deal much more damage against humans. Other than that, there isn't anything too different or significant. Alright, his limit burst. Guilt is a dark attack that does a lot more damage than Innocence, though it switches the 50% general mitigation team-wide buff to a 80% stealth buff instead. Many players won't find it as useful as a result. Which Brave ability should you prioritize? I'd go with Judge's Defense to make him a better tank, and, well, no preference between Enrage and Sentence. On one hand, Sentence is available in both forms, and it raises his limit burst gauge. On the other hand, Enrage is stronger. Speaking of damage, Gabranth can definitely play as a damage dealer in his Brave Shift. On turn 1, switch forms. Cast Earth-Splitting Darkness, Mistblade, and Enrage. On turn 2, triple cast Enrage. On turn 3, cast Guardian's Tenacity and dual cast Enrage. Okay, you're done. Just keep casting Enrage, and switch out for his buffs or Guardian's Tenacity when it's ready. Of course, this won't be the same thing in practice, as he will have to serve as a tank sometimes. So how good is Gabranth? He's by far the best Neovision physical tank in the game. He's also the only Neovision physical tank as of this video's release. On a more important note, physical tanks aren't too crucial right now. Most would prefer a magical tank alongside an evasion provoke unit. Sure, Gabranth can serve that role, but there are breakers or supporters that can contribute more in the long run. His chaining capabilities are definitely useful, though his damage can't be called game-breaking by any means. In the end, Gabranth's a great unit who doesn't really have a purpose in life. Well, maybe he'll shine when we actually get content that requires incredibly competent physical tanks.